Welcome back, everyone, to the breakdown presented by 9NINE2. Now, today we're going to be reviewing Formula Drift Round 5 at St. Louis. Now, I wasn't one of the judges at this round, but we are going to be reviewing 4 battles today, and I'm going to give you a little insight on why the judges went the way they did, and an opinion on how I saw the battle go based off what footage we see today. All right, so the 4 battles that we're going to get into today are Chris Forsberg versus Matt Fields. We have Shanahan versus Castro. We have Minowa versus Rad Dan. And we're going to be starting off with Prospect, Justin Chestnut versus Cole Richards. All right. So we have Chestnut in the lead, Cole Richards in the chase. Initiation comes in, outside zone 1, filled out by Chestnut. Here comes the transition. You can see, a little bit of a shallow line by Cole Richards there. Gets into outside zone 3. You can see Cole's creeping forward just a little bit. Here comes the transition. Oh, looks like the car unsettled a little bit. You see Chestnut does cut the line in outside zone 4, but we see a pretty big error between outside zone 3 going into outside zone 4 from Cole Richards. So let's see if we can get a replay on that as well too. We're going to point out a couple things that I saw there. All right, so here comes the initiation. We see Chestnut gets into outside zone 1. Looks like he hits the wall a little bit. Cole, not in the picture when it comes to proximity at all at the moment. Had he been a little bit closer, that probably would have disrupted his line a little bit, but he's just not in the picture right now. You see Chestnut does come out of outside zone 1 a little bit early. We can clearly see that from this angle. Here comes the transition, getting into outside zone 2. You can see Cole Richards gets into outside zone 2, 1 tire, and then bam, right there, he starts to creep out. Now, I do want to point out that we also have Chestnut, who goes into outside zone 2, but you can see both tires now have exited outside zone 2 as well. All right, so they're both on a slightly shallower line. Going into outside zone 3, you can see right here, this is going to be what I think a definitive moment in this battle here. We can see that Cole does a good job in getting proximity, gets good angle. But you can see something happens here where he maybe surges forward maybe a little bit too much, puts him in a bad spot. And you can see here that Chestnut is pretty much, loading his car up in order to do the transition into outside zone 4. But we can see Cole Richards doesn't seem to have the same type of windup right now. And I think that's going to result in what we saw as... yeah, that's going to be a problem there. Now, we also see that Chestnut goes into outside zone 4, comes out of outside zone 4, but he's just not in the picture right now. Cuts the line a little bit against the line. Chestnut definitely cuts outside zone 4 completely. And Cole Richards, that miscalculation was a big error going from outside zone 3 into outside zone 4. You can see it again here. You can see Cole's doesn't get to outside zone 1 at all in the chase position. Transition comes in, creeps out of outside zone 2. So we see 2 outside zones in the chase that he didn't complete. We're also going to say Chestnut also came out of outside zone 1 early, also came out of outside zone 2 early as well too. Chestnut does get into outside zone 3, but you can see right here, Cole Richards definitely creeps forward a little bit. It looks like, I think right there, that's when his car unsettled. And it's going to introduce grip into the car, and we see that huge correction. Looks like a straighten up. Chestnut gets into outside zone 4, cuts the line heavily. Doesn't really play a role because Cole Richards really isn't close at all in proximity. Let's flip it around. All right, going in. Cole Richards does a good job getting into outside zone 1. Completes it really well. Good transition. Going into outside zone 2. See an error there as well too from Chestnut in the chase. Cole does a good job getting into outside zone 4, completes outside zone 4, does a really good job in the lead. Really good job in the lead. Can't really take anything away from that. We see initiation. Chestnut's way on the inside line. Way on the inside line here. Cole gets into outside zone 1. Man, what? Chestnut, what are you doing, bud? Looks like Cole Richards could have gone a little bit deeper, maybe stayed a little bit deeper before exiting. Chestnut eventually gets into formation. Here comes the transition. Cole Richards does a really good job getting to outside zone 2. Like the transition. You can see Chestnut does a good job getting into outside zone 2. Stays in outside zone 2 a little bit longer than Cole Richards does when he was chasing. You can see Chestnut does exit. See, Cole Richards does stay into outside zone 2 a little bit longer. Then we see a huge bobble. I don't know. There's definitely an error here from Chestnut. Looks like, I don't know if he breathes off the throttle for a second, reintroduces grip into his car. I don't know what happened there, but definitely an error there. You can see Cole goes into outside zone 3. Here comes the transition. Outside zone 4 by Cole Richards. Killer. That was a killer line by outside zone 4 by Cole Richards. I like the lead. The lead looks really good. Let's watch it again. Yeah, see, Chestnut's really far on the inside here. Cole gets online. He gets it. Cole Richards does a good job getting into outside zone 2. Completes. He's in outside zone 2 a little bit longer. There is an error there by Chestnut. Creates a huge gap. Stays deeper into outside zone 4. Man. So, let's go to the judges' notes. All right, now, for Robbie, Chestnut in the lead, shallow line and outside zone 2, leaves outside zone 3 early and misses outside zone 4. So Robbie definitely sees Chestnut has some errors in the lead. The chase, Chestnut's follow, Richard's lead line. Richards when he was chasing him, a good lead line, slightly leaves. Richards shallow line in outside zone 1, no proximity in outside zone 2, shallow line into outside zone 3 and outside zone 2 into outside zone 3. Richards pretty much straightens from outside zone 3 going into outside zone 4, missing outside zone 4. So Robbie definitely sees that there is an error between outside zone 3 going into outside zone 4. Now, there was another thing we have to pay in mind is there is a big distance between Cole Richards in the chase and Chestnut in the lead. So, although Chestnut did have errors in the lead by missing outside zone 4, I don't think that really caused the error that happened with Cole Richards going into outside zone 4. I think what may have happened is that there was a miscalculation in the transition, and it put Cole Richards in a bad spot. His car unloaded, straightened up, and it was just too much for the judges to not to see. And we can see here that Robbie definitely sees that there was an error there. Now, overall, Richards had a more dominant lead, but his mistake in the chase from outside zone 3 to outside zone 4 was too big. More than 1 second of straighten, so borderline incomplete in the chase. Chestnut bobbles in outside zone 2 and almost straightens, but not as bad as Richards. Now, this is coming from Robbie Nishida, and we can see here he's definitely leaning with Chestnut because of the huge error that Cole Richards had from OZ3 going into OZ4. Now, Vernon very much agrees with this, and he wants to add on that Chestnut in the lead touches the wall, causes a minor correction, but Cole in the chase overall just a shallower line and shallow angle, also highlighting as well that he had an error going from outside zone 3 into outside zone 4. Brian as well, the main thing for him was the chase. Both runs were pretty similar. Both drivers having mistakes in the chase. However, Richard straighten after outside zone 3 was right, if at not past the 1 second rule. Didn't rule it as an incomplete at the time, but it was very close to it. Definitely viewed it as a bigger mistake as it was slightly longer straightened than the one that Chestnut may have had after outside zone 2. Richards also made it look more like a reinitiation than Chestnut did when he had his mistake. Honestly, this could have been very close as a one more time for him, but it was just too many mistakes from both drivers to warrant it, so he chose Chestnut. So at the end of the day, I can 100% see why they ended up going with Chestnut. I also can see why they would have went one more time, or why Brian was thinking about maybe going one more time. But unfortunately, the error that we can see that comes from all three judges, going from Cole Richards, going from outside zone 3 into outside zone 4, was just too big of an error for the judges to oversee. And they ended up going with Chestnut to get the win in this case. So I hope you guys get a little clarity on that. It was a close battle. I understand how at first, you know, you look at all the errors and stuff like that and maybe just assume things, but you really have to take the opportunity to look at everything that happens in the battle, compare everything together, and that's how ultimately the judges get the results that they did. So definitely see where they were going with that. We'll just make it official here. All right, so we're going to see the final result. Robin Ishida goes with Chestnut, so does Vernon, and Brian Eggert also goes with Justin Chestnut. The next battle that we are going to be reviewing is Minowa against Rad Dan. Drivers are off. Initiation, see Minowa gets into a wall a little bit. Rad Dan does a good job of adapting to what's going on in front of him. Minowa gets into outside zone 2, going into outside zone 3. Oh, Rad Dan looks like he comes a little bit unraveled. Takes us a way shallower line. Minowa stays on outside zone 4, nice and wide. A little bit of a bump. Man. All right, so just going off of what we see there, I can see that there is obviously an error with Rad Dan in outside zone 3. Looks like maybe you surged a little bit forward, caught a little bit of grip, put him more on the inside. I'm sure that's not something the judges didn't see, and it's going to weigh against him. Now, I also want to note as well, for Minowa in the lead, he gets into the wall. The wall throws his line off, forces him to exit outside zone 1 a little early. Again, this is something I'm sure the judges are taking consideration. Now, props to Rad Dan, does a really good job of adapting to what's going on in front of him. It doesn't even look like the wall hit that Minowa did even phased Rad Dan. You can see here he set himself up in good position to do this transition going into outside zone 2. Transition comes in a little bit late on that transition for him. I'm sure he would have wanted to position himself a little bit better to really get into the pocket. See, Dan has one tire in outside zone 1, one tire out. Minowa's in there. We're going to go into out now. Now, right here, I think where things are going to get pretty interesting when it comes to Rad Dan and the chase. Now we can see good proximity. He's in the pocket. Something happens here where Rad Dan starts to come heavy on the inside line, starts to come out a little bit of angle. We can see, let's slow it down a little bit. Comes out of angle a little bit, stays on throttle. Oh, looks like a little bit of a straight in, gets back way on the inside. You can see, let's go back just a little bit here. We can see Minowa in the zone. He's in and outside zone 3, and Rad Dan is just heavy on the inside here. Let's see it in real time again. Let's back up a little bit. Yeah, that's too much. I don't know if the car could be gripped up, could have been a miscalculation. There's a lot of things that could have been there. You know what I mean? Maybe he breathed off the throttle for a second, and then he found out and got back on. Maybe the car's too gripped up. A lot of things but the thing that we do see is that was an error, and that is not something that the judges aren't going to turn the blind eye to. You can see that transition puts him in a bad spot going into outside zone 4. Minowa is deep into outside zone 4, really deep into outside zone 4. That transition sets up Rad Dan incorrectly, brings him on the inside, comes in really close, bumps him a little bit. We're going to go over this. I think this is going to be the deciding moment. We can see coming in, good positioning by Rad Dan. So far, so good right here. But you can see, takes angle out, surges forward, gets on throttle again to try to get some angle, get some proximity, puts him way far in to the right on the inside line. Almost seems like he exceeds the front wheels, at least from this angle. Now, right there, I think this puts him in a really weird position because now he has to do this transition going into outside zone 4, and it's going to put him way on the inside. Yeah, it looks like there's too much grip in this car. Something's happened up. It's bringing him way on the inside, but I really think it's more so the miscalculation of that transition, which is going to put you on a tighter radius. You can see he surges forward a little bit more, gets close, and then bumps him a little bit. So I definitely feel like that is going to be a good chunk of what the judges are looking at when it comes to an error in the chase behind Minowa. Again, I'm sure they did see the error from Minowa when he hit the wall. But that error that Rad Dan had in the chase is pretty significant at the moment. We're going to turn it around now. We're going to switch positions. Rad Dan is in the front, leading. Minowa is in the chase. All right, and they're off. Here comes the initiation. Raddan gets into outside zone 1 clean. Here comes the transition. Minowa right there, closes proximity, comes in. Dan does a good job in outside zone 3. Here comes the transition. Good job by Raddan. Gets into outside zone 4. Not as deep as Minowa did, but Minowa, good job in outside zone. Good job in the chase. Not on his door all the way, but I can only assume that his spotters probably told him, hey, listen, you have an advantage right now, or so we think, because of the huge error that Raddan had. And that ultimately is going to give you a bit of a... At least when I was a spotter, that's what I would have been saying. I can only assume that that's probably what was said at that moment. Say, hey, be cautious. Still apply some pressure. Make sure that you're in the building. But right now, I feel like you have an advantage because of the error that Dan had in the chase. Now, we're going to watch here the side-by-side. Raddan does a good job getting into outside zone 1. I like the proximity. I like outside zone 1 in the chase better by Raddan. I will say that. Good lead, and I think the reason for that is because Minowa ended up having that bump on the wall that messed up his line a little bit. See, Minowa's in the building. I really want him to have a little bit more angle, to be honest with you, when it comes to that. Good transition. He gave him a little bit of space. Gets into outside zone. Well, not really. Doesn't really get into. He gets one tire into outside zone 2. Dan is in outside zone 2 now. Let's go forward a little bit. It looks like Minowa is deeper in outside zone 2 in the lead than Dan is. And I think they're just about the same when it comes to the chase. All right, so right here is going to be what I think the deciding moment of this battle. All right. Obviously, Raddan has really good proximity. He is up on his door. You can see, man, Minowa, we need more angle, bud. We need more angle here. I'm sure he's going to pour it on a little bit, but he's not messing up. Now, had Raddan kept this proximity and didn't have that little fumble that we're about to see, I would have been all about this chase and not this. I don't really like this. All right. I prefer this, but right here, you can see this error is just way too big for the judges to overlook. All right. Again, I'd want better proximity, more angle out of Minowa going into outside zone 3. I don't even think he gets one tire into outside zone 3. So all good there. But this error over here ultimately is just way too big. I mean, we're in there. Look, we're almost exceeding the front wheels of the lead driver there. Not a good thing. That's a big mistake. Transition again. Minowa definitely has some things he could have improved on. I think he could have better proximity in certain areas. I think he could have better angle in certain areas. A lot more of this and less of this. But in this case, now that we have that error by Raddan, that's we got to compare those two. And he does a good job in the chase in comparison to the chase that we're getting from Raddan. See, Minowa doesn't get into outside zone 4 at all in the chase. Deep into outside zone 4 in the lead. Raddan is midline going through outside zone 4. So, now, before we get into the results here, let's go over some of the notes that we have from the judges. Now, for Brian, it was close of going one more time at this one, but Burkett's mistake in the chase and then that big one in outside zone 3 kind of prevented that from happening. So for Brian, he can clearly see that mistake from outside zone 3, where he went heavy on the inside, was just too big of a mistake. You can see here he was leaning toward it one more time, but that big mistake that Raddan had in outside zone 3, where he went really hard track right, really shallow line, almost looked like he straightened up, was just too big of a mistake for Brian to overlook. Had he not made so many mistakes in the chase or that one in outside zone 3, I would have given him the win. So, see, sometimes you're just one mistake away. As for Minowa, his lead was good minus the wall tap in outside zone 1. However, in the chase, he had multiple mistakes similar to Burkett. I had them tied for the lead, and I just barely edged out Minowa ahead of Burkett in the chase. So, although Minowa did have some errors, they didn't accumulate enough to kind of overshadow what was going on with Dan Burkett in outside zone 3. Now, I can only assume we're going to get the same from Vernon and Robbie as well. Minowa in the lead, a bit late in outside zone 3. He does have a little twitch in outside zone 1. Burkett in the chase, pushes through outside zone 1, outside zone 2, outside zone 3, creeping up on the front wheels, nearly overtaking the lead, causing a weird transition into outside zone 4, heading into lead. So, there we can see Vernon as well also agrees, pushing hard, doing what he needs to do, but when he gets into outside zone 3, creeping up on the front wheels, nearly overtaking the lead, causing a weird transition to outside zone 4, which is what we talked about. It probably set him on the wrong spot in order to perform that transition, to have the proper radius to go into outside zone 4. We can see Vernon also highlights that along with Brian. So Brian and Vernon both see that. We're going to see Robbie here. Robbie, Minowa's wall tap, Minowa in the lead. Minowa's wall tap in outside zone 1 was not good for minimal correction, maximized line, but running all the zones right on the line. Burkett had a good lead in outside zone 1, leaves outside zone 2 and outside zone 3 a little early, and dips a tire in outside zone 4. In the chase, Minowa overall is a shallower line, shallower angle, and shallower line. So that's definitely something that me and Robbie both kind of see there. All right, he definitely speaks about it here. I agree. Going into outside zone 2, into outside zone 3, and all the way to 4, you can see Minowa was heavy shallow, maybe trying to make up for proximity. Don't know, but we need more angle there for sure. Minowa's chase overall shallower line, shallower angle on outside zone 2, outside zone 4, 1 car length proximity away the entire way. So the proximity wasn't there, too far away. So that's why I can also see how they were kind of teetering a little bit, kind of going back to what Brian said. It could have been one more time, but that mistake by Burkett was just too much for him. You can kind of see Robbie's kind of alluding to that as a little bit as well too. Now, Brian, Burkett, great proximity in outside zone 1 when he was great proximity in outside zone 1, slightly shallower line in outside zone 2, a bobble and offline in outside zone 3, offline mid of outside zone 4, almost surpassing the lead, pulling out a lot of angle, dragging through the finish line as well too. So we can see all the judges are having a huge issue what's going on in outside zone 3, although they notice and they see that there were some mistakes from Minowa. They can't overlook the mistake that Rad Dan had in outside zone 3 going track right. So I agree with the judges. I totally see where they're coming from in this situation. Again, we can't just fixate on one thing. You have to take everything into consideration in the battle. And I think once you do that, based off of what we're seeing from the judges' notes and what we're seeing here, I see where they're coming from. You know, I think it was a fair call, and I think it was the right call. But he did a good job. Dan did a good job. Again, I agree with Brian. Had he not had that error in outside zone 3, I think this would have been a whole different ballgame. All right, now going on to the next battle, we have Connor Shanahan and Jonathan Castro. This is the one more time battle between these guys. Now, before we get into this battle, I just want to touch base on the previous battle that alluded to this one more time. That was the battle where Connor Shanahan's tire debeated on his lead run. He had an opportunity to call his 5 minutes in order to put the tire on again, because that was a DB due to contact on the track. So because he hit the wall, it debeated. He was allowed an opportunity to put tires back on his car, but use up his 5 minute time. Now, when Connor debeated, he continued his run. He filled out all of his zones. This was as per the judges that were explaining to me. He filled out all of his zones. He did everything he needed to do, got where he needed to, and Castro as well placed the car behind him, did a great job in the chase. Ultimately, they wanted to see a cleaner battle. They ended up going one more time, and that is what we're going to be reviewing here. Yeah, that's another thing I want to say. When we're talking about this one more time, the decision that came to be was Robbie Nishida ended up going with Jonathan Castro. Vernon ended up going one more time, and Brian ended up going with Connor. So 100% split between all the judges. we're going at it again one more time. So we have the two drivers here. Set them up, and they're off. Connor in the lead. Connor goes into outside zone 1 on throttle, fills out outside zone 1. Here comes the transition into outside zone 2. Castro a little bit shallow going into outside zone 2. Connor getting into outside zone 3, deep into outside zone 3. Castro doing a good job, closing the proximity, dives in. Connor on a good line in outside zone 4. Want him a little bit deeper. Castro closes the proximity, and they cross the line. Good first battle. Good first battle. The only thing that I see so far, just based off of that, is Castro, when he transitioned going into outside zone 2, you can see way in on the right, inside line, chops the line a little bit. That's something that's definitely going to be noticed by the judges. You can see here, I want a little bit more angle, closer by Castro here. I definitely want Connor to be a little bit deeper, so I can understand why Castro maybe gave him a little bit of space there. Nice. Goes into outside zone 2. Now you can see right there, unfortunately, Castro dives in. I can see he was trying to position himself to get right into this pocket right here. But maybe the car rotated too much on the transition, put him on a slightly tighter radius of a line, gets on throttle, and then that radius puts him on the inside line where he doesn't want to be. Doesn't fill outside zone 2. We're going into outside zone 3 now. Connor is in the lead. Gets about a quarter of the way, gets into outside zone 3. Castro, though, unfortunately, just is not in outside zone 3 at all. And I believe he doesn't get into outside zone 3 at all in that entire bit. So we can see outside zone 3. Castro tries to close proximity, tries to get a little bit more angle, but not successful. Doesn't get into outside zone 3. Connor is in outside zone 3. You got to keep that in mind. Transition comes in here. Connor does good getting almost to the wall there in outside zone 4. Castro does a good job of diving in. I would like Connor to be a little bit deeper. Now he's on the line, but you can see Castro starting to come out. I'd like him to be a little bit deeper over here for the for the angle and then having the proximity. Looks like he positioned himself better going into outside zone 4. Castro gets right in line. Not bad. Definitely a good lead. Definitely a good lead by Connor. You can see Castro is doing his best to cheat a little bit, gets back into the pocket. I like that he decided to cheat a little bit and then gets right back into the pocket, gets into line again. But, you know, if you decide to cheat a little bit, and you can see he leaves outside zone 4 a little bit early there, they're going to see it, you know. It's not going to be perfect at that point. The judges are going to see those little corrections and those little adjustments that you're doing in order to close the gap. All right. We have Castro in the lead. Connor in the chase. Castro gets into outside zone 1. Transitions into outside zone 2. Connor does a good job. Keeps the proximity right there. And Connor's doing a good job of keeping the proximity right in the pocket. Transitions in. Castro. Oh, whoa. Connor definitely has an error going from outside zone 3 into outside zone 4. Let's watch the replay, see what that looks like. For example, I don't think the error that Connor has here is as severe as what we saw with the Cole Richards battle. But either way, it's a mistake. Transition comes in. Now, something we point out here. The transition happens. Castro is in outside zone 2. I like that Connor in the chase is in outside zone 2, keeps proximity, keeps good angle. Right here, this I think is what's really putting the exclamation point on is Connor had a really good lead. But look at this chase, especially going from outside zone 2, going into outside zone 3. Applying the pressure. I don't want to say he's pushing him, but man, he's kind of pushing him. Goes through, gets into outside zone 3. Now remember, when we were looking at Castro in the chase, he was not into outside zone 3, missed outside zone 3 completely, although I believe Connor was a little bit deeper than Castro was in outside zone 3 here. The transition comes in, and that's where Connor has his error. Now I don't know if maybe Connor transitioned incorrectly, timed the transition incorrectly, but it definitely put him on a more inside line. Then he lights off again in order to in order to keep on going through. Now, again, I do think there is a difference between that error and what we have saw with Cole Richards, where it was a heavy straight in, clear as day, based off of what the judges are saying. This one, a mistake, but I don't think quite it's a straight in, but it's definitely something that's going to take in consideration when they look at this battle. Here's the side-by-side. We can see the placement of Connor is a lot better in the chase compared to Castro's. All right. It looks like Castro is a little bit more shallow or not as deep in outside zone 1 as Connor is. We're going to have the transition come in. Now, here you can see proximity is better by Connor. He's in outside zone 2. Castro's proximity isn't as much. And you can see Castro comes out of outside zone 2, so he's on a shallower line. Connor at this point is still in his he starts to creep out a little bit, though. All right, but Castro's fully out at this point. You see Castro looks like he's only has one tire in outside zone 2 right now, which, man, if he would have been deeper, probably a little bit better for him, because what happens next is big. So you can see here, this is going to be, in my opinion, this is going to be a definitive moment. We're going to see the side-by-side going into outside zone 3. We're going to see Connor having proximity, having everything he needs, having the angle, massaging him through that whole outside zone 3. But Castro is going to be in the chase, and he doesn't get into outside zone 3. Goes through. You can see here. Connor gets into outside zone 3. Castro is just on a shallow line. Doesn't get into outside zone 3. Now, Castro is in outside zone 3 barely. Now, that's not good, because if you have... You're just giving Connor that much more of an opportunity to get closer. He doesn't have to get as deep as you or anything like that. You can see proximity's better, angle's better. You can see the comparison here. Connor's just doing a good job. Now we come into the transition into outside zone 4, where here you can see the car unsettles a little bit, but it's not a strain. At least I don't view it as a strain. I don't think the judges view it as a strain either. But let's go to what the judges have to say about this, so we can touch base on it a little bit here. Get a little background on it. Now, for Robbie Nishida in the lead, all right, Shanahan has a great lead running the outside line, slightly shallow in the middle of outside zone 4. So we do see that we would want Connor to be a little bit deeper. Fills outside zone 2 and fills out zone 3 completely. Castro has a good lead, not super deep in the zones, leaves outside zone 2 a little early, gets into outside zone 3 late, and leaves outside zone 3 a little early, missing outside zone 4 a little toward the end. All right, Castro has a shallow line in the lead, and outside zone 1, outside zone 2, outside zone 3, and only half of outside zone 4. Proximity was okay, got close at outside zone 2 and outside zone 4, but a lot less angle and on a shallower line. Now, again, for Robbie, for Shanahan in the chase, he ended up giving it to Shanahan because the lead was better, and 75% of his chase was dominant over Castro. And any driver that leaves outside zone 3 early puts the chase car in a tight situation where it affects the transition points going into outside zone 4. So we can see a little clarity on how Robbie ended up seeing that situation here. It's looking like, because Castro ended up coming out of outside zone 3 early, it potentially, in Robbie's eyes, put Connor in a bad position where he miscalculated the transition and put him more on a shallower line and gave him that bobble or that correction that we saw going into that. Now, Vernon, adding on to everything there, Shanahan in the lead. Good lead, but in outside zone 3, mid-exit, and outside zone 4 was mid-zone. Could have been a little bit deeper to have the perfect line. So, all in all, it looks like Vernon thinks that Shanahan has a really good lead line, but in order to be perfect, he could have done a couple other things. Castro in the lead for Vernon was pretty much just mid-zone all the way around. It could have been a little bit deeper in outside zone 1, but you can see right there, lead to lead, you can see, just from Vernon's point of view, Shanahan's lead is held up to a higher standard at that point. It's just a lot better at this moment. Castro's chase overall shallow line and angle and cuts outside zone 4. Now, Shanahan has a close chase, but he does have a big correction in outside zone 4. So this is something that Vernon sees as well too. But ultimately, they ended up going with Connor, as we're going to see in a second. We're going to see Brian Brian Shanahan in the Shanahan immediately fills outside zone 1. Castro is not inside outside zone 1 at the beginning and running slightly less angle. So that's something we did point out when we saw Connor in the chase. We could see the proximity and the angle could have been a little bit better by Castro. Shanahan does a great job getting into outside zone 2 fully. Castro sets up going into outside zone 2 great, but leaves the zone about a quarter of the way going around it. So we can see another error that we saw there when it comes to Castro diving into outside zone 2, doesn't calculate, goes on a shallow line. When we see the run where Castro is in the lead, and we can see here, Brian sees that Connor is also pushing him through, fills out the outside zone, and completes everything, pushing him through, sets him up a little, sets up the correction that goes into outside zone 4, but we can see if the judges are looking at the miscalculation of the miscalculation of Castro leaving outside zone 3 early, again, really can put Connor in a rough position there. So I can definitely see how Brian is seeing this as well too. Verning is seeing it as well. We'll touch a little bit on the second half of the run here when it comes to Brian. Castro never gets more than one tire into outside zone 1. So this is when Castro's in the lead. Doesn't really get more than one tire into outside zone 1. Shanahan maintains the same line, slightly less angle going to outside zone 1 and close proximity. Castro started off with a good line in outside zone 2, but in the beginning starts shallowing up, and halfway through the zone, Shanahan still close on the same line with slightly less angle. Halfway through outside zone 3, Castro has one tire fully in and one tire just outside. Shanahan maintains the same line with slightly less angle and leaves outside zone 3 early. So again, I think the issue that the judges are having when it comes to what happened with Connor going into outside zone 4 is that due to the early exit of outside zone 3 caused that error there. So again, we have to take everything in consideration on what they see out there. The judges ultimately go with Connor Shanahan for the win here. Now, I can see why the judges ended up going this way. I know a lot of people probably saw the error that Connor Shanahan had in the chase. And what I think ended up happening is that a lot of people probably judged it, right, the same way that maybe some people would have judged Cole Richardson's, where they're like, oh, well, that has to be a 0. Now, after reviewing the footage and seeing it, I don't think it was a 0. I don't think it was a strain. Yes, was it a correction? Sure. But if you take that correction, you take Connor's lead, you take Connor's chase, and you compare all of that with everything that Castro did in the lead in the chase, the errors that he had and everything like that, it just outweighed it. So, unfortunately, in this case, the errors that Castro had compiled was more of a deficit than the error that Connor had going into outside zone 4, which clearly they all see that there was an error, but it wasn't enough to give Castro the win. So, Connor Shanahan ends up getting the win on this one in the one more time battle. So, that was a hard one. I know a lot of people were asking about that one. Happy I was able to give a little clarity. Again, this is a judge sport. Castro, awesome guy, man. Just you win some, you lose some sometimes. You know what I mean? But this is a judge sport. You're not always going to agree with the judges, but I really feel like if you have an opportunity to look at the battle and you compare all the errors and stuff like that, it's pretty transparent, and you can kind of see why the judges go the way they are. So, the way they go. All right, so the next battle that we're going to review is Chris Forsberg and Matt Field. Now, I want to start off by saying when I first saw this battle, I remember I called Nate Hamilton, and I was like, man, I probably would have went one more time with this. But when I get to sit here and review the battle, I think I'm changing my mind on this one. I can see why the judges went the way they did. But hey, let's review the battle and let's break it down together, and maybe you guys will see the same thing that I saw. All right. Oh. All right. Here we go. Chris in the lead. Here comes the initiation. Chris goes into outside zone 1, hits the wall a little bit, throws his line off a little bit. Here comes the transition. You can see a little bit late into outside zone 2. Field gets on throttle, closes the proximity, gets on throttle again. Chris into outside zone 3. Good job. Prepares for the transition. Transition comes in. Fields comes in, dives in a little bit. Looks like there's an error there. Surges forward again, ends the run. We can see this on the replay. Obviously, I think Chris does a good job in the lead, but we do see an error at that bump. So let's see what happens here. The initiation happens. Chris gets into outside zone 1. Matt is following suit. Now you can see the hit. This hit throws off Chris Forsberg's line and has him exit early. The hit happens. You can see right there, Chris is now outside of the zone, doesn't have the angle that he would want to complete it. I'm sure he would have wanted to swept right through that, stayed right close to that wall, but he hit the wall. It brought him in on an inside line. More importantly, I believe it puts him on an incorrect point on the track where he wants to prepare for this transition. The transition ends up happening late. We can see here, at this point, I think Chris would have already wanted to start this transition. He's coming in late. The transition happens. You can see he's on a much inside line. The transition happens pretty much going into outside zone 2 where they want that beforehand. Gets on throttle. And you can see here Chris not really deep in outside zone 2. Matt, same thing. He's taking the inside line. Not ideal. Cheats a little bit. Gets back into the pocket. Good. See, Chris gets into outside zone 3 there. Now we see the transition comes in. I don't know if Matt surged or what may have happened there, but you know, I don't think it was a straighten. But definitely is an error. Definitely is an error. Now, we're seeing it from this point of view. We're going to see a better view of Chris in the front. And the lead hits the wall, puts him on a slightly inside line. Now, look at Matt Fields behind. Committed to his line. Good job adapting to what's going on in front of him. You can tell here, this transition, he was thinking about already transitioning. So I think Matt always sees like, man, this transition is happening a little bit late. I need to start getting ready. The transition comes in. Fields does a good job of adapting to that. Chris gets into outside zone 2. Matt Fields starts catching up a little bit, takes a little bit of angle out. Chris gets into outside zone 3. Looks like 2 tires now. Good transition into outside zone 4 by Chris, and then right here, I don't know if like Matt surged forward, and then maybe it looks like he was on the front brakes, the rear brakes. I don't know if he like lunged forward real quick, put him in a bad spot, lifted for a second. You can see he pours on angle here. You can see right there. He pours angle on. Gets back on throttle. Car straightens up a little bit. Ooh, I don't know. Ugh. Man. All right. So we're going to switch positions now. We're going to have Field in the lead. And we're going to have Forsberg in the chase. Now, we saw errors by Chris Forsberg in the lead. All right. So again, as I said before, the lead is very important. You want to have virtually no errors when you're in your lead because that's going to weigh against you. All right. We're going to watch Field now do his lead. We'll see. All right. So we have Matt Field in the lead. Here comes the initiation. Gets into outside zone 1. No hit on the wall. Nice and deep into outside zone 1. Here comes the transition. Forsberg following suit. Gets right into the pocket. A little bit of separation. Field gets into outside zone 3. Transition comes in and to outside zone 4. Forsberg doing a good job getting right into the pocket. Good chase by Forsberg. Now, what we can see here is that Matt Field had a really good lead run from what I'm seeing. It's a good lead run. Just off of that, just off of seeing just that right there, I can already see Matt's lead run is better than Chris's, in my opinion right now. Chris had an amazing chase, but that's also because Matt gave him an amazing lead. Let's watch the replay. We have Field gets into outside zone 1. Chris massaging his way in. Would have liked him a little bit closer. Transition comes in. Better transition going to outside zone 2 than Chris did. But Chris does a really good job getting into the pocket here. Then the separation starts to happen. Matt gets on throttle, gets into outside zone 3. Chris, one tire in outside zone 3. Transition comes in. Chris does a good job of diving. Would have liked him to be a little bit closer, a little bit more angle. Now, I can only assume that maybe, right? Maybe they thought they had the advantage due to what Matt Fields did in the chase. I think Chris could have been maybe a little bit more aggressive here to really seal the deal. You know? Let's go over the judges' notes when it comes to this battle here. Now, from Brian Eggert, Forsberg had a couple of mistakes in the lead, like hitting the wall in outside zone 1 and not filling it fully, which is something we talked about. All right, he hit the wall. That wall pushed him outside of outside zone 1. Not ideal. Sets him up incorrectly for going into outside zone 2. He didn't fill outside zone 3 or outside zone 4 as well as he could have. Plus, he was late getting back into throttle in outside zone 4. In the chase, he never got into outside zone 1 or outside zone 3. Field did a good job in the lead with a couple minor mistakes on not getting into outside zone 3 as early as he could have, and his line shallowed up just a little bit in the middle of outside zone 4 in the chase. Field adapted to Forsberg's mistakes in the lead and did pretty good. Now, I can only assume that when Brian is talking about getting into outside zone 3 as early, and he could have had his line shallow up slightly going into the middle of outside zone 4 in the chase. I kind of see where he's coming from that. I can only assume that that's where he saw the correction by Matt Field, having that little bit of an error going into that. So again, not sure if he lunged or what, but at least we have a little perspective from how Brian saw it. Now, when it comes to when it comes to Robbie, he ended up going with Matt Fields because in the case of this is a good case of good lead versus lead and a good adaptation in the chase position in the lead's mistakes. So from Robbie's point of view, all right, just like I said before, the lead is very important, all right? I'm not saying the chase isn't, but the lead is crucial. This is big, all right? He's comparing the lead to lead, and on top of that, he's giving Matt Field credit because he was able to adapt to the errors that Chris was performing when he was in the lead run. When it comes to Vernon, Chris Forsberg's lead hit outside zone 1, causing a correction and a late transition into outside zone 2. So these are these little corrections that we're seeing. Yes, I think a lot of people may have focused on what they saw Matt Field do from outside zone 3 going into outside zone 4. Or in outside zone 4, but then you have the mistake from Chris outside zone 1 when he hit the wall, pulled him out, the late transition, and coming out of outside zone 4. A lot of things compile together. Again, you have to compare the entirety of the battle to what's going on, and that's how you come to your result. Late transition, middle of outside zone 2, outside zone 3, very late to decel in outside zone 4 was what Vernon was seeing from Chris Forsberg. Now, from Vernon, Field in the chase was good on a poor lead run. So here, another example, Vernon's just plainly saying Field did a good job in the chase, even though the lead run by Chris wasn't ideal. It was a poor run, he says. When it comes to Matt Field's lead, he did good in outside zone 1. He did good in outside zone 2. Exit mid-zone. Outside zone 3 was good. And outside zone 4 was also as well a little bit of a decel. And then Chris Forsberg in the chase, shallow line, shallow angle. So you can see there, all three judges definitely had an issue with the lead run with Chris Forsberg. He had some errors. I could only assume that if Chris Forsberg wouldn't have hit the wall, he would have cleanly went through outside zone 1. He would have transitioned better into outside zone 2. And I think this may have been a different story. Now, at first glance, I thought this would have been a one more time. But again, I think I did what a lot of people do, even myself. I target fixated on what I saw Matt Fields do in the chase, And I thought this was a one more time. Now, even if I was one of the judges and I would have went one more time, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the battle. But when I sit down now as a judge and I look at everything, I look at the replays and everything, I can see why now they ended up going with Matt Fields for the win. So I do think it was the correct call. It was a tough battle. It was a lot to unravel, but I think what we can learn for some of this is that we can't become target fixated on just one error. We have to take the entire battle into consideration, compare everything, and that's how we come with the result. So I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope this helped you guys understand a little bit more on what's going on in the Judges Tower. And make sure you guys like, subscribe, make sure you put down some comments, let us know. And stay tuned for the next one. I will be one of the judges in Seattle, and then we'll be doing a breakdown on that. So I'll see you guys then on the breakdown.